So good day everyone. So for today I will be discussing deontology, which is also called duty-based ethics or rule-based ethics. So medyo deep ni siya nga topic, but I will explain it to you in a simple and relatable way para mas masabtan ato tanan. So first, what is deontology? So deontology is a category of normative ethical theory that focuses on rules and duties. So meaning ang question ani is not unsa ang resulta, but rather than sakto ba ang action nga gibuhat based on rules. So in simple terms, you do something because it is your duty to do it. So for now, let's proceed for the etymology. The word comes from the Greek word deon, which means duty. So klaro na kaayo nga in this theory, we talk about obligations and responsibilities. So common names of deontology are duty of ethics and rule-based ethics. So, and its core motto is bound to one's duty. That means nga needed ka mo act based on what is morally required, not based on feelings or the outcomes. So now, let's go for the assumptions or the foundational assumptions. So first, emphasis is on the norms, duty or obligation. And then we also have, no matter how morally good their consequences, some choices are morally forbidden. Nga bisan nice pa ang outcome, if the action itself is wrong, that it is not allowed. Like, if ako, mangilad ko sa akong amigo para ma-okay lang siya, it is not morally right. So then, what makes a choice right if it is then what makes a choice right is its conformity with a moral norm. So, when a decision follows a moral law, then it is right. And then the right is said to have priority over the good, which is very important na ang atong action is sakto jud rather than makakos ka or makahatag ka og good pero ang imong way na pagbuhat ana is mali. So, if an act is not accord with the right, it may not be undertaken no matter the good that it might produce. So if something violates the moral law or the rules, you should not do it even if it leads to something good. So the rule of intention. Another important concept of deontology is the intention. One is acting a certain way only if they act for the right reason, which means nga dili lang kay sakto ang atong action nga nabuhat, but also sakto ba ang reason kung anong imo nang gibuhat. So for example, for the Sabbath, it is wrong to work on the Sabbath because God says so. So if an atheist doesn't work in Sabbath because their employer gives a day off, the behavior is not morally right because they are not acting for the right reason. So ang pasabot ani is like same sila og action nga gibuhat nga wala sila nag-work in Sabbath day, but the intention is not morally right, dili siya sakto since atheist siya, and then also nagkalaylay sila og moral values, so the intention is not really right. So that's all for the introduction of deontology.
So my part on this report is deontology versus other ethical framework. Let's start with the act of guidance against character guidance. So deontology and contextualism provide an act of guidance. They tell us what sort of action that we should take. This means that deontology and contextualism focuses on guiding action by telling us what we should do in specific situation. And let's put this in the test. So action guidance and character guidance put on a situation where someone lost a wallet. Let's start with the act of guidance. You find a lost wallet, and using the act of guidance, using this theory, help you decide what to do during that situation. So, by using act of guidance, you think of it as like, should I return it or should I keep it? But if you use the character guidance, instead of just deciding what to do, you think about it. You think really hard about it. It's like, what would an honest person do? So it aims to be the kind of person that you expect would do it correctly. So that is a character guidance. Next is virtue ethics. Unlike deontology, virtue ethics provides character guidance, focusing on what sort of people we ought to be. Basically, this means that virtue ethics focuses on developing good character traits and becoming a morally good person, rather than just deciding which actions are right or wrong. Let's put this on the test. A student studies hard not just to pass the exam, because by doing this, it does not only pass the exam, but it also becomes a discipline and a responsible. It becomes responsible. It focuses on building a good character rather than just getting good results. That's virtue ethics. Next, we have consequentialism. Consequentialism holds that an action's rightness or wrongness depends on the consequences it causes. Basically, consequentialism judges action based on their outcomes, meaning an action is right if it leads to good results, like happiness, and wrong if it leads to harm. So, let's put an example of you lie, okay? You lie to protect a friend from trouble. If the outcomes prevents harm, then consequentialism is being used properly and is acceptable because it leads to a better result. On the other hand, deontology holds that an action rightness or wrongness depends on its conformity to a certain moral norm, regardless of the consequences. So, deontology judges action based on whether they follow moral rules or duties, regardless of its consequences. Unlike other things, this thing doesn't really care about any of this because it follows the moral rules and the duty regardless of the consequences. So, by doing the same thing as on consequentialism, you lie. You refuse to lie, though, in the deontology because you believe lying is always wrong. Even if it could help someone, you will always still refuse to lie. The action is judged by the rule, do not lie, not the outcome of the situation. So basically, deontology just follows what's morally right, but not really correct. So that's deontology against other ethical framework.
Now we will be heading on to categorizing deontological theories. Again, deontology is an ethical theory that focuses on duty, rules, and moral obligations rather than consequences or outcomes, and it is divided into two main types. First is the absolutist deontology, or the rule-based, and the non-absolutist deontology, which is act or case-based. But we will be discussing absolutist deontology first. So this approach believes that moral rules are fixed and must always be followed, no matter the situation or outcome or unsa man ang result. So from the rules, it is fixed. Therefore, it must be followed. Dili mo matter kung unsa yang outcome, but making sure nga ang rules are followed. So for absolutist deontology, we have the divine command theory, rights theory, libertarian theory, Pufendorf's theory, and Kantian ethics. So divine command theory, it explains what is morally right or wrong, and is this determined by God's command. So for example, a person refuses to lie because the religion teaches that lying is always a sin, even if lying could save someone from harm. So in this situation, so because it is common knowledge and by God's command, we know that lying is wrong, it is a sin. Therefore, it should not be done, even if makasave patag life or makasave tao from harm. The next is the rights theory. This theory explains that people have fundamental rights. Examples is the right to life, the freedom, and these must always be respected. Example would be a doctor refuses to perform euthanasia because it violates the patient's right to life even if the patient is suffering. So we have our rights, especially the right to life. So, in this rotation, ang doctor is dili siya mo participate sa euthanasia because he or she respects that the person has the right to live. Bisan pa okay baw siya nga kanang maka-lessen sa suffering sa person. Dili niya makaton because it is morally wrong to end someone's life. So next is the libertarian's theory. This theory emphasizes individuals' freedom and autonomy. People have the right to make their own choices as long as they do not harm others. So an example is a person supports freedom of speech even if others express offensive opinions because everyone has the right to express themselves. So in our time right now, it is very common naman no nga kanang mo-express siya sa atong feelings, especially in the presence of social media nowadays. Dali na kayo ta makapost kung sa atong gibati without thinking of kanang maybe naatay masakitan. Like example, kanang mo-express sa gibati na to sa atong enemy. Post na yun ta sa Facebook. And then, without thinking na basin ka ng dili kay ta mga sensitive sa ilahang part pa nga kanang maka-offend na ta, makasakit na ta, just because we have our freedom of speech. So, mo to no, nga dili mo matter ang unsay consequences nga nakasakit ta as long as naka-express na tong gibati because we have our freedom of speech. Next is the Pufendorf's theory. This theory focuses on duties toward God, oneself, and others. Moral actions are based on fulfilling these duties. An example is a student studies hard not just for grades, but because it is their duty to develop themselves and respect others who support their education. So ani no, ani nga situation dili lang kay mo study ta for grades, but we know that studying is the right thing to do because to pay respect sa nagpaskwela na to. So, yan na. So, dili gyapon mo matter ang outcome magtuon ta kay or makadako ta grado. But instead, ang kuan na to nga more respeto ta. And it is our duty and responsibility as students nga mag-study. Next is the last one for absolutist deontology, the Kantian ethics. Immanuel Kant teaches that actions must follow the universal moral laws and treat people as ends and not means. Example is a person returns a lost wallet even if no one is watching because honesty should be a new universal rule. So generally, no, we know that stealing is very wrong and we could go to jail for that. So we know that stealing is morally wrong. So no to nga bisan walay magtanaw na to, we must maintain honesty and we should do the right thing. Honest ta, so iuli na to ang wallet nga nawala na to nakitaan. So that's all for the absolutist deontology. Now I'll be proceeding to the non-absolutist deontology or the case base. This approach believes that rules are important but not always absolute. The decisions depend on the situation or competing duties. So for non-absolutist deontology, we have theological revelationist, principle of permissible harm, and pluralist deontology. So theological revelationist explains that moral decisions are guided by religious teachings, but interpretation may vary depending on the situation. So an example, a person may break a minor religious rule like fasting if it affects their health because preserving life is more important. So in situation like this, especially during Lenten season, no, Catholics are expected to do fasting or abstinence kanang dili mo kaunog karne. But in this situation, consider niya nga like kani si naay kay sakit. So of course, alangan mag-fasting ka if you know nga nakay sakit. So you have to eat to kanang provide nutrients that the body needs. The next is principle of permissible harm. Some harm is allowed if it leads to a morally acceptable outcome, but harm should not be intentional or excessive. An example, a doctor performs surgery that causes pain, but it is acceptable because it it saves the patient's life. So in this situation, no, of course, our priority is to save the life of a person. So in this situation, no, na kanang mag-surgery, syempre, naturally, the patient, we will be causing pain to the patient. But in return, makasave man po ta sa iyang life. So, acceptable ra ang outcome. Next is the pluralist deontology. There are multiple duties, example, honesty, loyalty, justice, and we must decide which duty is more important in a situation. Example, you promise to meet a friend, but you see someone injured. You chose to help the injured person because saving a life outweighs keeping a promise. So, ano yung situation, no? A person ka nang nagsabot siya, na siya pa, nakikisabot siya sa iyong friend nga, magkita sila. But then, on the way to meeting her friend, nakakita siya nga na ay ka ng tao nga na-discuss siya. So, of course, iyang unahon is katong isave tabangan ang tao nga na-discuss siya because it is much bigger responsibility and it outweighs ang iyang promise nga makikita sa iyong friend. In summary, no, absolutist deontology follows strict rules and no exceptions. So, kanang ani is follow gid siya kung unsay sakto, unsay rule, unsay balaod, no matter the consequences or the outcome. While for the non-absolutist deontology, it follows rules but consider the situation and competing duties. So ani, mo follow siya rules but then iyang i-consider or justify niya ang situation kanang if outcome ba is ma-acceptable ba siya. So that ends my part in categorizing deontological theories.
Good afternoon, my name is Aileen Cordova. So, let's move forward. So, what are the main theories under deontology? There are several, but I will be focusing on four important ones: the Golden Rule, Divine Command Theory, Natural Law Theory, and the Non-Aggression Principle. I'll also explain one key concept called Marxism. Okay, so let's start with probably the most familiar one, the Golden Rule. So I'm sure you have read this before. Do to others as what you want them to do to you. It's also called the ethics of reciprocity. So, but when we look closer, there are actually limitations to the Golden Rule. So it assumes that everyone wants the same thing. The Golden Rule is based on what you want. But what if what you want is not what the other person wants? So, for example, let's say that I love surprises. So in a situation, my birthday is coming up and I want my friends to surprise me. So I think I should surprise my friend on her birthday because that's how I want to be treated. But what if my friend hates surprises? She might feel anxious, embarrassed, or like be scared. By following the Golden Rule, I actually end up doing something that makes her uncomfortable. The problem is, I'm thinking about what I want and not what she needs. It's to focus on the doer and not the receiver. The Golden Rule asks us to look at ourselves. What do I want? But maybe a better question would be, what does the other person need? So, yeah. Next is the divine command theory. This theory is straightforward. We have a duty to obey God, and whether God commands is morally right. If God says do not kill, then killing is wrong. That's it. There's no negotiation, no exemption, no waiting of consequences. An important point about this theory is that divine command theory is not considered normative moral philosophy in the strict sense. Why? Because philosophy is about using reason asking questions. giving arguments and thinking things through. But divine command theory is based on faith. You follow God's commands simply because God said so, not because you have reasoned it out. So, moving on to natural law and natural rights theory. So, this theory says that nature gives us clues about what is morally good. We can use our reason to understand these clues and act in line with them. Basically, what is moral good is good, and what goes against nature is bad. So, for example, eating is natural. We need food to survive. But if someone eats too much to the point where they harm their health, become obese, or develop diseases, that's going against the natural purpose of eating. So the natural purpose of eating is to nourish and sustain life. But overeating does the opposite. It's morally wrong. On the other hand, if someone eats too little, starving themselves, refusing food even when they're hungry, that also goes against the natural purpose of eating. So that's morally wrong too. The idea is that we should act in a way that respects our natural design. This theory also connects to the idea of natural rights. Thinkers like John Locke argue that we have certain rights simply because we are human. Rights like life, liberty, and property. These rights come from nature, not from any governmental law. And because they come from nature, no one has the right to take them away from us. We learn more about this later when we talk about patient-centered deontology. So next, we have the non-aggression principle. There is only one exemption: self-defense. If someone attacks you first, you have the right to defend yourself. You can use force in response to aggression, but you can never be the one to start it. This principle is absolute. It applies to everyone, all the time, no exemptions, as self-defense. Except self-defense. Okay, so it doesn't ask about consequences. It doesn't ask about feelings. It just says, don't start force. That's exactly what deontology is about. Clear, fixed rules that you are bound to follow no matter what. This principle is very important to libertarian thinkers, but it also appears in many legal systems. For example, the law says you can't assault someone, but you can defend yourself if attacked. So the non-aggression principle is both a moral law rule and a legal one. So, maxims. Now let's me explain about what maxim is, because this term will come up again later when we discuss Kant. So, a maxim is simply the reason behind your action. It's the rule or principle that you're following when you decide to do something. Let's say your maxim is try to reduce world hunger. So this is the principle guiding you. Because of this maxim, you might take certain actions. You might donate money to food organization. You might volunteer at feeding programs. You might start an organization that helps others, help farmers grow more food. All these different actions come from the same underlying maxim. In deontology, especially in Kant's version, the morality of an action depends on the maxim behind it. You can just look at the action, but you have to ask, what principle is this person following? For example, two person might both give money to a homeless person, but one does it because they genuinely want to help, and the other does it because they want to look good in front of their friends. And the action is the same, but the maxims are different. In deontology, only the first person's action is truly moral because they acted for the right reason.
So we have imperative. An imperative is a command to act as it is prescribed. So an imperative is a command that tells us what we ought to do. An example would be doing your homework. It applies in imperative as it directs behavior by giving a clear instruction or rule to follow. Imperatives have two parts. We have the hypothetical imperatives and the categorical imperative. Let's start with the hypothetical imperative. So, hypothetical imperatives commands that are not absolute but conditional and promise one's desire. These are conditional commands that only applies if you have a certain goal or desire. An example would be, if you want to pass this test, you ought to study. The command only matters if you actually want to pass the test. But if you don't really care about passing the test, then hypothetical imperatives doesn't apply to you. Next, we have categorical imperative. Categorical imperatives are absolute and unconditional moral of commands. So basically, for categorical imperatives, these are unconditional commands. They only apply to everyone regardless of their desires. An example would be the same thing: you ought to study, but not because you want to pass the test, but because you are a student. It applies to categorical imperatives by being the duty to study applies whether or not you feel like it, because it is based on obligation and not personal desire. So that is imperative, and it's two parts.
Okay, so before we start, I want to recap what does deontology means. So just like earlier, di ba, i-discuss naman na siya. So the word deontology comes from the Greek word deon, which means duty. Alright? So the main idea about deontology is that morality is about doing what is right based on rules and duties. So it is not based on consequences. So even if the outcome is bad, as long as you followed your moral duty, the action can still be considered morally right. So in simpler terms, you have to do the right thing because it is right. So sa Bisaya pa, so buhata ang sakto, kay mauman ang sakto. So bisan unsa pa ang resulta. Okay, so that's a little recap for what we learned about deontology so far. So karon na atay gitawag nga agent-centered deontology. So duha ni sila na agent-centered deontology and patient-centered deontology. So karon let's talk about agent-centered deontology first. Okay? Okay, so now let's understand what this agent-centered deontology means. So from the PPT, so agent-centered deontology focused on the duties of the moral agent, so which is the person. Morality is intensely personal, and we are each charged to keep our own moral house in order. So the focus is to keep our own agency free of moral contamination. So we only answer for our own actions and not how for others act in response. So in simpler terms, or as a sort of explanation, so it focuses agent-centered deontology focuses on the person acting, so which is also called the moral agent. All right, so this means that each person is responsible for their own actions and not for what others do. So kita or ikaw ang responsable because imuha mang binuhatan. Okay, so the theory says that morality is personal. So you are responsible for maintaining your own moral integrity, so which means that you must make sure that your actions are right, so even if others act wrongly. So mo ni ang iyang gipasabot aning keeping your moral house in order. So even if many people are doing something wrong, you are still expected to do what is right. So kani pong napoy word diri nga moral contamination. So if ever mangutana mo, this means that you should not allow yourself to become morally wrong just because of the actions or reactions of others. So for example, if telling the truth will cause many or other people to lie, you are still expected not to lie. So bisan pa man og telling the truth, so kung storya ka og sakto will cause many people to lie, then that expected gihapon nimo, or yourself is expected not to lie. So dili gihapon ka allowed to lie. So why? It's because you are only responsible for your actions, for your own actions and not theirs. So dili nimo sala ang ilang sayo. Ang importante, limpyo imong konsensya. Ang aking konsensya ay clear. Okay guys, so karon let's go to the different types of duties. So naatay duha ka types of duties. So naatay gitawag nga agent relative duties o agent neutral duties. So kani I won't be reading the PPT, instead I will explain it to you directly na lang kung unsay pasabot. So kani let's start with agent relative duties. So these are duties that are specific to a person depending on their relationships or roles. So pasabot ani, so some duties apply more strongly to you because of who you are. So some duties apply more strongly to you because of who you are. So for example, so a parent saving their own child instead of two strangers. So even if more lives could be saved by saving the two strangers, it is still morally acceptable for the parent to choose their own child. So kung mangutana mo, nganong ang child man imong i-save kaysa sa two strangers nga, di ba mas better o makasave kag duha? Well, it is because ang parent or a parent have a special obligation. So na siya obligasyon or duty to their child. So they have the duty, they have the obligation to protect their child and also to save their child. So mo nang it is morally justifiable nga i-save nimo imuhang anak against the two strangers. Okay? And also, let's also move so that motoy pasabot sa agent relative duties. And then let's move on to the agent neutral duties. So these are duties that apply equally to everyone, so regardless of personal relationships. So examples like do not kill, follow the law, or do not lie, mga yana. So ang pasabot ani mga universal rules, so everyone is expected to follow them. So kitang tanan dapat mo follow ani. Muna siya pasabot og agent neutral duties. Okay? Okay, so now let's move on to the mental states and the doctrine of double effect. So kaning doctrine of double effect, medyo nakastorya na gamay si Sir about ani, or nakadiscuss na si Sir about ani, maybe parang last segment siguro to. So we're just gonna dive in a little bit more about it. So the mental states and the doctrine of double effect. So an action is right or wrong because of the intention that motivated it. So take note of the word intention. Okay, so let's focus on to the doctrine of double effect. So this is a very important concept in deontology. So it focuses on the intention behind an action. So meaning that you must never intend to do something evil. So but it is sometimes acceptable if a bad effect happens as a side effect, pero not the intention. Okay, so dili ka you are not intended, you are not meant to do something evil, pero if mura siya unexpected nga kanang outcome, o something like unexpected nga outcome nga wala kahibaw nga bad effect di siya, o mura siya side effect gali, unya dili nimo intention nga maingana siya, then that is morally acceptable or acceptable siya sometimes. So to understand it better, I will give you an example. So a pregnant woman has cancer and a doctor performs surgery to save her life. So the surgery results in the death of the fetus, so namatay ang fetus. So this is considered morally acceptable. Why? Because the doctor's intention is to save the mother, not to kill the baby. Diba? So ang intention sa doctor is to save the mother, pero dili patyon ang baby. So more or less nga ang intention is to save the mother, and also i-try po niyang i-save ang baby, but somewhat unexpected effect or side effects po siya kung mag-surgery ka o cancer, then of course side effects mamatay siguro ang bata. So in contrast, kung atong i-compare siya sa direct abortion, So kaning abortion, it is completely not right. Okay, so because it is considered morally wrong because the intention is to kill the fetus. So mura siya kanang, if we are going to base it on deontology, dili siya sakto kay ang intention is to kill the fetus. So ang atuang key idea ani is that intention matters more than the outcome. Okay? Okay, so another example for that to better understand ato ang i-relate siya sa atong profession as nurses. So I have another example here. So naay a senior nurse tells you to falsify a patient's chart to avoid trouble. So na kunoy senior nurse or kanang mas dako-dako nimo nga nag-ingon nga pikiun kuno ang mga documents or ang charting, o just to maybe to make it more efficient, dili na ta magbalik-balik og pangutana sa patient magingana, so magpiki-pikion na lang nato ang chart. So according to deontology, you must refuse. So dili ka mosugot or dili ka mo agree. So even if kasukan man ka, or you might get with or kanang magka-conflict mo with your senior. So even pa man na kakahibaw maka nga dili sakto nga mag-falsify og mga charts or mga, especially because documentation is an important part of our nursing process, or kahibaw man jud ana na it is really important, right? All right. So our duty is to be honest and accurate. So dili pwede magbakak sa chart kay sayop na, guys. Okay? So bisan pa o gisugo ka sa mas tiguang nimo or like mas higher og ranggo nimo. So bisan pa man og kay ba man ka nga dili sakto, so dili jud nimo siya buhaton. All right? So now let's go to the different actions, which is doing versus allowing. So doing harm versus allowing harm. So agency equals will added to action. So deontology distinguishes between an act that causes a result and an omission that allows it. So kaning doing harm, kung doing harm, it is more active, and kung i-compare nato siya sa allowing harm, more on passive siya. So to better understand the difference between the two, ato siyang i-compare using an example. So for example, you have a baby. So kanang baby murag imong gilumsan, so holding a baby underwater. So kana siya, it is an example of doing harm because it is murder, right? So it is more active, you are actively doing it, as compared to seeing a baby drowning and not helping. So nakita lang na nalumos pero wala nimo tabangi. So mura siya allowing natural death or allowing harm, di ba? More on passive area siya. So both are morally wrong, but doing harm is considered more serious than allowing harm. Okay? Okay, so since we're done with the first type, ari na ta sa patient-centered deontology. So unsa ra itong deontology nga atong gihisgutan ganiha? It is what? Agent-centered deontology. So karon ay napunta sa patient-centered deontology. So kaning patient-centered deontology, I'm gonna read the PPT. So this series that deals with rights. So it is commonly common among libertarians and influenced by John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. So ang focus niya is rights of the person. So patient-centered deontology focuses on the rights of other people. So muna to again gi-influence siya by different thinkers like John Locke and also Thomas Jefferson. So its core principle is that an action is morally wrong if it violates someone's rights. Okay, so dili siya sakto if i-violate siya sa rights sa isa ka tao, you know? So kay ba naman sa mga different rights sa kanang isa ka person, right? Yes. So na yung mga basic human rights. So sa may example, if mangutana mo, so na right to life, right to liberty, right to property, or pursuit of happiness. So these rights must always be respected. So we always have to remember that we do not use people as means only. So dili lang gamito na to ang people as means or murag tools, right? So you must never treat a person as just a tool for your own benefit. So in simpler terms, you cannot use someone without their consent. So even if it leads to good results. So murag dili jud nimo pwede gamiton ang tao para sa imuhang gusto kung wala kay permission or permiso. Okay, so for I will give you another example. Okay, so using someone's body, skills, or effort without their permission. So gagamit kuno ka sa mas body, skills, or effort without their permission. So this is morally wrong because it violates their rights and their dignity. However, if there is consent, then the action can be morally acceptable. Okay, so that concludes my part for this result, which is the agent-centered deontology and also the patient-centered deontology. So as a sort of review, deontology teaches us that right actions are based on duty, so not consequences. So we are responsible for our own actions, and intentions matter more than outcomes. So we must respect the rights of others. So in deontology, morality is not about what happens in the end, but about whether we did what is right. So sa deontology, dili ang resulta ang basihan, kundi kung sakto ba ang imong gibuhat. Okay? So I hope that you guys understand from my part of the report, and thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. So today I will be discussing you the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant. So specifically focusing on his categorical imperative. So as what Ms. Buktuanin said earlier or mentioned niya earlier, so Kant's approach is deontological, so which means it is a duty-based ethics. So morality is based on duty. So para ni Kant or Immanuel Kant, so ang sakto kuno nga buhaton is dili based sa atong feelings or gut feelings. So asa man siya ga-base? So it is based on reason and logic. So when we say logic, so ang kinahanglan jud nga mo come up sa atong mind is critical thinking. So it involves critical thinking, right? So using our minds to see if an action is consistent. So Kant believes that because we are human beings man, so we are rational beings. So which means that we have the capacity to think or to know what is right. So like without relying sa atong own emotions. So para ni Kant, morality for him is an absolute command of reason. So dili ni siya like mingon ta nga it depends on the situation. So dili siya ingana. So it's a no-no. Kay kasagaran na ba nato mingon jud ta if tagaan tag dilemma bitaw mo na ta nga it depends on the situation. So kundi isa ni siya ka obligation kumbaga nga kinahanglan nato i-follow based sa atong pagka-rational beings. Okay? Okay, so before we go to specific rules, we have to talk first about the goodwill. So, matod pa ni Kant, the only thing in the entire world that is good without qualification is a goodwill. So, think about it. So, like makunaw na tas hay, di ba nga, is intelligence good ba or is wealth good? So, ana si Immanuel Kant nga not necessarily or not always good. So, for example, so kintay na ay criminal nga intelligent, then he uses it to commit better crimes. So, like, wealth and power can be used, di ba, for evil purposes, like if the person has a bad intentions. So if ang person is na bad intentions. So pero ang goodwill is different. So it is the intent to do the right thing simply because that is your duty. So even if you try your best to save someone but you fail, so para ni Kant, your action is still morally good. So nga naman, because your will was pure. So pure imong intentions, maong morally good ang imong actions. So, like in simpler terms, so it's not about the success or the results. So it's not about the results, diba? So it's about having the right heart and the right reason behind your actions. Okay? Okay, so now let's move on to his two formulation. The first one is the act only according to maxims that can be universalized without contradictions. So mo na ang iyang first nga formulations. So a maxim is just your personal rule, as what Miss Ayen said earlier. So Kant's test is, what if everyone in the world did what you're about to do? So what if kuno if ang tanang tao buhaton ang imong gibuhat pod, di ba? So if the result is a world that cannot function, then the action itself is immoral or morally wrong, di ba? Okay, so now let's look at the standard trolley problem. So it is the most famous nga moral dilemma if mag-talk ta about og kanang ethics or yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, pod mao pa ni ang example ni sir katong pag-report sa utilitarianism nga topic. So you can see in the picture na atay train, na atay duha ka pathway, ang isa ka pathway na ay 5 ka tawo, and then ang usa ka pathway na ay 1 person only. And then sa tunga naa ang usa ka tawo which is naa ni siya dapit ag lever. So ani nga dilemma. So most people think jud kay utilitarian jud, like utilitarianism ang God follows the principles of the greatest good for the greatest number. Kung unsa ang kinadaghanan mao ang greatest good. So since 5 lives are more than 1, so a utilitarian will pull the lever to save the 5. So ito yung birahon ang lever padung sa 5 ka tawo, di ba? But Kant disagrees. So if mo based na sa duty ethics or the deontological ethics, so that's immorally. So morally wrong jud na siya. So kintahi if naa si Immanuel Kant ana, so maana jud na siya nga, can we make it a universal law to kill an innocent person whenever it saves more people? So maana jud na siya dai. So if we do that, no one is safe, di ba? Wala jud ma-save nila ana. So for Kant, if you pull that lever, you are choosing to kill. So if hilabtan na nimo kanang control, so you are choosing to kill. So since killing is an innocent cannot be a universal law, as what Mr. Carrizosa said man siguro. So Kant argues that pulling the lever is a violation of duty because like ni contradicts just a fundamental respect for every life, as what I've said. So yeah. Okay, so now let's move on to the second formulation. So treat humanity in oneself and others never merely as a means to an end. Okay, so this is the principle of human dignity. So Kant says we must never treat people as a means to an end. So dili na to gamiton. Dili na to i-treat ang people as a means to an end. So meaning to say, so dili kuno nato himuong tool or instrument ba kumbaga, or like kanang silbing way si Jaba nga ma-achieve ang atong goal. So yeah. Okay, so for example, naatay picture ini. So naay fat man di ba sa bridge, and then I train nga mo approach sa pathway nga naay tao, and then ma-save ang tao nga naa sa pathway if i-push nimo kaning fat nga man. So para ma-stop ang train nga padong. So a utilitarian would say, so utilitarian na pud ta, so would say push him. So itod kuno ang fat man. It is still the greatest good for the greatest number. So mauna ang principle sa utilitarianism. I-push ang man para maluwas ang person or people nga naa sa pathway or track. So, but for Kant, so yeah, this is strictly immoral. So, it is not morally good. So, ngano man, no? Mintag ngano man, nga ma-save man ang katong lives sa mga people nga naa atong track nga gababag kung padung na ang trolley. So, because by pushing him, you are treating that human or that man's body as a human stopper. Diba? As what I have said earlier, never treat people as a means to an end. Diba? So, to Kant, every person is an end in themselves. So, always recognize that human individuals are ends. So, meaning they have absolute value or intrinsic value that cannot be sacrificed for the majority. So, na sila value usag-usa nga dili masacrifice sa tanan. So, mauna ang buot pasabot ni Kant.
Now heading on to the evaluation of duty-based ethics. Again, deontology focuses on doing what is right based on rules, duties, and intentions, not on the consequences. And like any other series, it has its strengths and weaknesses. But we will go on first to its strengths or the good points. So for the good points, we have 5. First is it emphasizes the value of every human being. Second is it provides certainty in decision making. Third, it focuses on intentions and motives. Fourth, prioritization of personal ties. And fifth, recognition of supererogatory actions. So first, it emphasizes the value of every human being. Deontology teaches that every person has equal worth and dignity and should never be treated as a means to an end. So an example is a nurse treats all patients equally whether rich or poor because everyone deserves respect and care. So ani, dili mo matter kung unsa ang background sa patient. But because everyone is person, na sila right, they should be treated with respect and care. Second, it provides certainty in decision making. It gives clear rules. Example is do not lie, do not kill, so there is less confusion or gray area. So again and again, deontology focuses on following fixed rules. So naa siya balaod nga gisunod gyud. So, less confusion. For example, a student refuses to cheat on an exam because it is simply wrong, regardless of the outcome. So, we all know that cheating is very wrong, no matter if ang kuan ba niya effect ani nato is good, like ako atong grado, but cheating is wrong. It's in itself. So therefore, it must not be done. Third is it focuses on intentions and motives. Actions are judged based on why you did them, not just the result. So, dili mag-matter unsay result if good or bad ba ang result, but rather unsay reason nga nung gibuhat ko nimo. Example is a doctor tries to save a patient but fails. The action is still morally good because the intention was to help. So ani is ang intention sa doctor was to initially save the patient's life. But unfortunately, he failed. But then again, ang iyang intention was to help. So the action is morally good. Fourth is prioritization of personal ties. It allows you to give special responsibilities to family and friends. Example, a person chooses to care for their sick parent instead of volunteering elsewhere because family duty comes first. So prioritization of personal ties. So of course, atong first priority good or sa atong first line of priorities is atong family. So instead of kanang mo volunteer ka sa lain, syempre, imo unahon imuhang family. Fifth is it recognizes supererogatory actions. These are actions that are beyond duty, good but not required. Example, donating a large amount of money to charity is morally admirable but not required by duty. So, dili siya required na ito nga buhaton. It is beyond our duty, but if buhaton na to siya, it is morally admirable. Now we will proceed to the bad points or weaknesses. And we have five 5 weaknesses. First is the absolutist nature can make the world less good overall. Example of this problem, conflicting duties and accusation of egoism. For the absolutist nature, explains that rules are too strict and may not fit all situations. So example is never lying even if it could save someone. Anino, so we know nga lying is bad in itself, and then because of this rule, then it could prevent someone from saving a life. Next is can make the world less good overall. So since it ignores consequences, it may lead to decisions that reduce overall happiness or well-being. An example, refusing to lie to protect someone could result in greater harm. So, mura siyang same ang tunong because we are trying not to lie. We could prevent ourselves from protecting someone that could result in greater harm. Third is the example of this problem. A strict deontologist may refuse to break rules even if it leads to worse outcomes. So because deontology follows a rule, so dili siya gusto nga ma-break ang rule. So even if kanang ang outcome ana nga action is bad na noon, kay dili lagi siya gusto nga ma-break ang rule. So dili niya i-consider ang outcome pod. So an example of this is not stopping a murderer because killing is wrong may allow more people to die later. And fourth is conflicting duties. Sometimes duties clash and it is unclear which one to follow. Example is duty not to lie, duty to protect a friend. If a criminal asks where your friend is hiding, which duty do you follow? So, no? Kanang so naaman kay ikaw na kay duty or na kay natay rule nga follow nga dita mo lie and naapod tay duty nga protect atong friend. But then if a criminal mangutana na to asa ang atong friend nga mohide, asa nagtago siya, unsa man ato sundon? Ang duty ba nga not to lie or ang duty to protect our friend? Then the last accusation of egoism. Critics say it focuses too much on being morally correct yourself rather than improving overall outcomes. So because we follow too much the rules, strict rules that we follow ani, so imbes nga improve na to ang outcome, mas ma-focus ta on being morally correct or right. Example is a person refuses to break a rule even if doing so would help many people just to keep their conscience clean. So ani nga situation no, bisan pag makatabang ka sa daghan nga tao, dili ta gusto nga i-break ang rule man. So imbes nga mutawang ta, dili na lang just to keep our conscience clean. Ana. Another is kanang musunod ra sa balaod bisan pagdaghan na ang mag-adus. So murag nag-focus siya sa kaugalingong pagkamatarong kaysa sa kaayuhan sa uban. So in summary, strengths sa deontological theory, it respects human dignity, gives clear rules, values good intentions, and allows special duties to loved ones. And then sayang weaknesses, too rigid, too strict, ignores consequences, duties can conflict, and may seem self-focused. Okay, so that ends my part on the evaluation of deontological theories. Thank you so much for listening to our discussion.